We're going to be going over chapter 1, which is the history of barbering. Back before, in the early ages, barbers were called barber surgeons. We did a lot of things. We pulled teeth, we did bloodletting, we did a lot of things that doctors do, and we were kind of like doctors in that era. And that's kind of what we'll be talking about in this chapter. I'm going to be starting here under ancient cultures, where you see it here in the book, and I'll begin reading stuff out of the chapter. And if anybody has any questions during this time, you can stop me and ask. And also during this reading of the chapter, I'm going to be stopping and letting you know some of the things that are important and some of the things that you're going to need to know for your state board test, because that's what we're preparing you for as well. I mean, we're taking tests here at the school, but when you leave here, you're going to have to go to Raleigh and take a state board test. And on that test, there are going to be written questions as well as a practical exam. And so it's myself and Mr. Floyd's job to prepare you all for this test. And that's what we're doing here in the classroom, going over this. And that's why this will be a good tool to go back and review. Even after you get out of school, you can still go to my YouTube page and this will be there. So, under ancient cultures, I'll begin. Archaeological studies from around the world have shown that haircutting and hairstyling were practiced as early as the glacial age. The simple implements used then were shaped from sharpened flints, oyster shells, or bone. Animal sinew or strips of hide were used as adornment or to tie the hair back, and braiding techniques were employed in many cultures. Many primitive cultures maintain a connection between the body, mind, and spirit. This conviction translated into superstitions and beliefs that merged spiritually, religious rituals and medical practices together in an integrated relationship. For example, some tribes believed that both good and bad spirits entered the individual through the hairs on the head, and that the only way to exorcise bad spirits was to cut the hair. In other similar religious ceremonies, long hair was worn loose to allow the evil spirits to exit the individual. Then, after ritual dancing, the barber cut the hair, combed it back tightly against the scalp, and tied it off to keep the good spirits in and the evil spirits out. Belief systems elevated tribal barbers to positions of importance, such as medicine men, shamans, or priests. The Egyptians are credited with being the first people to cultivate beauty in an extravagant fashion. Excavations from tombs have revealed such relics as combs, brushes, mirrors, cosmetics, scissors, and razors made of tempered copper and bronze. Coloring agents made from berries, bark, minerals, and other natural materials were used on the hair, skin, and nails. Eye paint was the most popular of all cosmetics, which, with the use of henna as a coloring agent, first recorded in 1500 BC. The use of barbers by Egyptian noblemen and priests years ago is substantiated by Egypt's written records, art, and sculptures. High-ranking men and women of Egypt had their heads shaved for comfort when wearing wigs and for the prevention of parasitic infections. Every third day, barbers would shave the priests' entire bodies to ensure their purity before entering the temple. The work of the barber, Merimot, was apparently held in particularly high esteem, as his image was sculptured for posterity. In some African cultures, hair was groomed with intricately carved combs and decorated with beads, clay, and colored bands. The Maasai warriors, for example, wove their front hair into 3 sections of tiny braids and the rest of the hair into a queue down the back. Braiding was used extensively, with intricate patterns frequently denoting status within the tribe. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there. Now, as y'all see, there were no hair dyes back then. People used, like coming to America, juices and berries. They use those to condition the hair, dye the hair, and things of that nature. Of course, in that time, they didn't have the technology or the type of implements that we use, but they still had some type of things to style their hair, because even way back then, hair was important, even in the early ages, as y'all can see. As we get on into the chapter, it's going to explain some of the instruments that were used back then. So we're going to flip over to the next page. Several biblical passages gave insight into the state of the barber in the Middle East. According to Leviticus, Moses commanded those who had recovered from leprosy to shave all their body hair as part of a ritual cleansing. Ezekiel refers to another ancient shaving custom when he says, "Take thou a barber's razor and cause it to pass upon thy head and upon thy beard." So we in the Bible, so we real. Based on these and other biblical references, and it has been accepted that barbering was available to the general population of the Middle East during the lifetime of Moses. And I'm not even going to go over the dates and stuff, because that's not going to be on the test. Although Greek barbers from Sicily introduced shears to Rome sometime between 800 and 700 BC, barbers were virtually unknown in Rome until 296 BC. It was in Greece during the Golden Age that barbering became a highly developed art. Well-trimmed beards were status symbols. Greek men had their beards trimmed, curled, and scented on a regular basis. Barbershops became the gathering places for exchanging sporting, social, and political views, while barbers themselves rose in prominence to become leading citizens within the social structure. Does that sound like something that's going on today? Mm-hmm. Everybody, even in the times of 500 to 300 BC, everybody gathered at the barbershop. The barber was the barber was the pillar of the community, even way back then. Mm-hmm. So, the status of the beard in Greece drastically changed in the 3rd century BC. When Alexander the Great's Macedonian troops lost several battles to the Persians as a result of the warriors' beards. The Persians would grab the Macedonian warriors by their beards and drag them to the ground, where they were either speared or beheaded. Alexander issued a decree that all soldiers be clean shaven. Eventually, the general populace adopted the trend, and barbers were kept busy performing shaves and haircuts. Dionysius Mena of Sicily has been credited with having brought shaving and barbering services to Rome in 296 BC. The men of Rome soon enjoyed tonsorial services such as shaves, haircutting, and dressing, massage, and manicuring on a daily basis, with a good portion of their day spent with the barber. While the average citizen patronized the barber's places of business, rich noblemen engaged in private tonsors to take care of their hairdressing and shaving needs. The Romans expanded the concept of these personal services to include communal bathing and what became known as the Roman baths. Clean-shaven faces were the trend until Hadrian came into power in 117 AD. Emperor Hadrian became a trendsetter when he grew his beard to hide scars on his chin, resulting in the populace following his lead, and the beard was again in fashion. In fact, the word barber is derived from the Latin word barba, meaning beard. That is one thing you are going to have to remember. I don't know if you all have highlighting pens or whatever, but when you take notes, on certain things, these are things, I'm going to let you know certain things that are going to be on the test when you leave here. So it would be good if you took notes, through all these chapters, and that will be a good study guide when you get ready to go take your test at the state board, and you can look back at your notes. And so definitely, Barbara, that word and the meaning will be on your state board test when you graduate here. Another word derived from Latin, tonsural, which will also be on the test that you need to know, derived from tondere, meaning to shear, means the cutting, clipping, or trimming of hair with shears or a razor. Now, how many of you have ever heard of somebody, we're referred as tonsorial artists? Have you ever heard that word, that definition? That's what barbers are also referred to as. So that's, if Jeff was here, that's like a fancy word for barbers also. You're a tonsorial artist. Where was I? Okay. It is often used in conjunction with barbering. Barbers are sometimes, that's what I just said, barbers are sometimes referred to as tonsorial artists. Customs and traditions. The beliefs, rituals, and superstitions of early civilizations varied from one ethnic group to another, depending on the region and social interactions with other groups. There was a general belief among many groups that hair clippings could bewitch an individual. Hence, the privilege of haircutting was reserved for the priests, medicine men, or spiritual leader of the tribe. According to the Greek philosopher and mathematician, I'm gonna get this from Pythagoras. Yeah, the hair was the source of the brain's inspiration, and cutting it decreased an individual's intellectual capacity. The Irish peasantry believed that if hair cuttings were burned or buried with the dead, no evil spirits would haunt the individual. Among some Native American tribes, it was believed that the hair and the body were so linked that anyone possessing a lock of hair from another might work his will on that individual. In almost every early culture, hairstyles indicated social status. In ancient Greece, boys would cut their hair open, reaching adolescence, while their Hindu counterparts would shave their heads. Following the invasion of China by the Manchu, Chinese men adopted the queue as a mark of dignity and manhood. Noblemen of ancient Gaul indicated their rank by wearing their hair long until Caesar, upon conquering Gaul, made them cut it as a sign of submission. At various times in Roman history, slaves would be allowed or disallowed to wear beards depending on their dictates, on the dictates of the ruler. Coloring agents were often used to add further dimension. The ancient Britons, extremely proud of their long hair, brightened blonde hair with washes composed of tallow, lime, and the extracts of certain vegetables. Darker hair was treated with dyes extracted and processed from plants, trees, and various soils. You're going to need to remember that as well. The Danes, Angles, and Normans dressed their hair with beautification, adornment, and ornamentation before battles with the Britons. In ancient Rome, the color of a woman's hair indicated her class or rank. Noblemen tinted their hair red. Those of the middle class colored their hair blonde. The poor women were compelled to dye their hair black. Much later, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth in England, it would become fashionable for men to dye the beard and cut it into a variety of shapes. In later centuries, religion, occupation, and politics also influenced the length and style of hair, as well as the wearing or not of the beards. Clergymen of the Middle East were distinguished by the tonsure, a shaved patch on the crown of the head. During the 7th century, Celtic and Roman church leaders disagreed on the exact shape of the tonsure. The exact shape the tonsure should take. The circular tonsure, called the tonsure of St. Peter, left only a slight fringe of the hair around the head and was preferred in Germany, Italy, and Spain. The Picts and Scots preferred a semicircular design known as the tonsure of St. John. After each argument, the Pope eventually decreed that priests were to shave their beards and mustaches and adopt the tonsure of St. Peter. So as y'all can also see, social stuff. Oh, go ahead.
Is the AC on?
Huh?
Is the AC on? It's hot.
Yeah, it's on. I can,
It's warm.
yeah. I mean, I can turn it down some more. Yeah. As you all see, the social status and things of that nature in early times was based on your hairstyle. You know, hair, as far as hair color, hair shape, hair design, how you wore your hair, all of it was based on your social status. And again, that's just the importance of hair in the community, and it goes back to kind of what I was telling you all about as far as the importance of barbers. You know, we've had a huge impact. Again, I'll say it, you know, since the days of Julius Caesar and before then, you know, and still this goes on today. All right, so I'm gonna continue on. Although the edicts of the church maintained some influence over priests and the general populace of several centuries, beards and longer hairstyles had returned by the 11th century. Priests curled or braided their hair and beards until Pope Gregory issued another papal decree requiring shaved faces and short hair. It was not until 1972 that the Roman Catholic Church finally abolished the practice of tonsure. Most rulers and monarchs became trendsetters by virtue of their position and power in society. Personal whim, taste, and even physical limitations could become the basis for changes in hairstyles and fashions. For example, in the 16th century, when Francis I of France accidentally burned his hair with a torch, his loyal subjects had their hair, beards, and mustaches cut short. During the reign of Louis the 14th, in the 17th century, noblemen wore wigs because of the king, who was balding, did so. During the 19th century in France, men and women showed appreciation for antiquity by wearing variations of the Caesar cut, the style of the early Roman emperors. That's still in the barbershop today. People will sit down in your hair, in your chair, and say, "I want a short Caesar," and that just means just a low haircut. If nobody knows what that means, that's what a Caesar cut is. Kind of like maybe the length of Caleb's hair on the top. You know, that's a term you're going to hear that a lot when you get out of here. Okay, now the beard and shaving. With the razor being such a defining tool for barbering, the history of shaving as well as caring for the beard in general deserves a second look. Since the practice of shaving predates the written word, it is difficult to determine just when this form of hair removal began. Excavations of early stone razors or scrapers from the upper Paleolithic period indicate that early Roman men may have used these tools for hair removal as well as for the skinning of animals. By the time of the Neolithic period, early man had created settlements and begun to farm and raise animals. Artwork of this period shows example of clean-shaven men, but is unknown how the hair was removed. In Egypt, however, pyramids from around 7000 BC have yielded flint-bladed razors that were known to have been used by the ruling classes to shave their heads as well as their faces. And by 4000 BC, a form of tweezers was also used. It stands to reason that the nomadic nature of many early groups helped spread the practice of shaving throughout the rest of the world. Where am I? Oh, I lost my place. Okay. Mesopotamians of 3000 BC were shaving with obsidian blades, and by 2800 BC, the Sumerians were also clean shaven. Likewise, Greek men of 1000 BC are seen in works of art visiting their local barber for shaving services. In early times, most groups considered the beard to be a sign of wisdom, strength, or manhood. In some cultures, the beard was a sacred symbol. For example, in Rome, a young man's first shave on his 22nd birthday constituted the rite of passage from boyhood to manhood and was celebrated with great festivity. To this day, among Orthodox Jews, The beard is a sign of religious devotion, and to cut one's beard off is contrary to Mosaic law. Beards have been removed throughout the centuries at the command of rulers and priests. Alexander the Great, as mentioned earlier, ordered his soldiers to shave their beards could not be seized in battle, so their beards could not be seized in battle. The Archbishop of Rouen in France prohibited the wearing of a beard in 1096, spurring the formation of the first known barber guild in France. Peter the Great encouraged shaving by imposing a tax on beards. Dang, that's deep. During the spread of Christianity, long hair became to be considered sinful, and the clergy were directed to shave their beards. Although the shaving of the beard was still forbidden among Orthodox Jews, the use of scissors to trim or shape excess growth was permitted. Muslims took great care in trimming their facial hair after prayer, and removed the hair was preserved so that it could be buried with its owner. Okay. Now, are there any questions or any discussion that you all would like to have about what we've gone and covered so far? It's just an explanation of how early barbers and early barbershops and how, things were done in those times. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next section, which is the rise of barber surgeons. And this part is going to talk about how we did some type of medical procedures and whatnot as barbers during that period. So, by the Middle Ages, barbers not only provided tonsorial services, but also entered the world of medicine. They were figured prominently in the development of surgery as a recognized branch of medical practice. This progress was the result of the barber's interaction with the religious clerics of the day. As the most learned and educated people of the Middle Ages, monks and priests had become the physicians of the period. One of the most common treatments for curing a variety of illnesses was the practice of bloodletting, and barbers often assisted the clergy in this practice. But in 1163, at the Council of Tours, Pope Alexander III forbade the clergy to act as physicians and surgeons or to draw blood, because to do so was contrary to Christian doctrine. Barbers stepped in and took over the duties previously performed by the clergy. They continued the practices of bloodletting, minor surgery, herbal remedies, and tooth pulling. For centuries, dentistry was performed not only by barbers, and for more than 1,000 years, they were known as barber surgeons. That is definitely going to be on the test. You all need to know that. Barbers, like I said, we did bloodletting, we pulled teeth, and that's what the term barber surgeon, that's where it came from in those early days.
So I got a question. Why do you think the Pope said it was against Christian doctrine to do the bloodletting?
I would probably think because of their beliefs that how they said that the evil spirits, could enter the hair and everything, and they were so big on what's the word I'm looking for? The spirituality of it. I think that, something with that blood, drawing blood and bloodletting like that, I think that probably they would think that their clergymen is for some type of religious reason shouldn't do it. If the book doesn't really give a good description of why they didn't want the clergymen to do it, but if I had to assume with the way their belief system worked back then, I think it probably had something to do with them believing that clergy shouldn't be drawing blood and possibly taking lives, because, in that day, if you were to do bloodletting, there were instances where it didn't work. And I think that probably has something to do
That's
with
the Catholic, that Pope, that's deal with the Catholic.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I add something?
Yes.
That's, you're on it right there, and it's like he was saying, like if you shouldn't be like taking like allowing somebody else's blood or doing something to cause somebody else to bleed out or something like that, and that's why it could happen. It's kind of like in this one particular religion, like The Bible says that you shouldn't ingest blood, you know, but in certain religions, they won't even take a blood transfusion because they feel like that's ingesting blood.
Right.
And so that's kind of where it came from too.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. Okay. Continuing on, the barber surgeons formed their first organization in France in 1096 AD, and by the 1100s had created a guild of surgeons that specialized in the study of medicine. By the middle of the 13th century, those barber companies had also founded the School of Saint Cosmos and Saint Domain in Paris to instruct barbers in the practice of surgery. The Worshipful Company of Barbers Guild was formed in London, England in 1308 with the objective of regulating and overseeing the profession. The Barbers' Company was ruled by a master and consisted of two classes of barbers, those who practiced barbering and those who specialized in surgery. By 1368, the surgeons formed their own guild with oversight by the Barbers Guild, which lasted until 1462. Although competition and antagonism likely existed between the two organizations, a parliamentary act united the two groups in 1450, while it officially separated the practices of each profession. Barbers were limited to bloodletting, cauterization, tooth pulling, and tonsorial services, while surgeons were forbidden to act as barbers. The merged guilds became the Company of Barber Surgeons. In 1540, Henry the 13th, recombined the barbers and surgeons of London through the Act of Parliament by granting a charter to the Company of Barber Surgeons. The company commissioned Hans Holbein the Younger, a noted artist of the time, to commemorate the event. With the advancement of medicine, the practice of bloodletting became all but obsolete. Although the barber surgeon's medical practice dwindled in importance, they were still relied upon for dispensing medical herbs and pulling teeth. Finally, in 1745, a law was passed in England to separate the barbers from the surgeons, and the alliance was completely dissolved. Barber surgeons had also flourished in France and Germany, following the formation of the first French Barber Guild in 1096. Barber surgeons, under the rule of the King's Barber, formed another guild in 1371, which lasted until about the time of the French Revolution. Ambrose Paré was a particularly noteworthy French barber surgeon, who went on to become the greatest surgeon in the Renaissance period and the father of modern surgery. Finally, many Europeans had become so dependent upon the services of the barber surgeons that Dutch and Swedish settlers brought barber surgeons with them to America to look after the well-being of the colonists.
Wow.
That's dope. That's big. Okay. And again, reviewing all of that, it's just the history, the things that Barber done in that era. You know, we were like doctors and things of that nature, and we performed surgeries, pulled teeth, done all these things. And so that's just a little brief history of what barbers did and what we were and how we operated in those times. So before I start on this next one, does somebody tell me what the colors of the barber pole stands for? Does anybody know? Other than sight?
The flag, American flag.
Blood. You was better off calling on me. And then, blood, bandages, and veins.
That's right. That's right. Cause I'm gonna tell y'all
Write
something.
that down, man.
Write that down. I was gonna say write that down. You took the words right out of my mouth. I'm gonna tell you, I said y'all need to write that
It's
down.
like 4
What's the
or 5
red
things.
for?
Blood.
Blue,
Veins.
white.
Veins.
Yes.
You know, it's like
Blood,
4 or 5
American
things in
flag.
that first one though we just went over. I mean, they ain't saying it because they never been over it, but write it down, man. They tell you to write it down for real.
Yes.
Or like, use your highlighters or whatever, use your pen.
Yes.
See, that's with about 4 or 5 tests.
Like,
Yes.
no, literally 3, but still,
Yes.
it's important.
And as a barber, there's nothing more embarrassing. You will be surprised at how many barbers do not know what those colors stand for.
Yeah.
People will ask you from time to time, what does those colors mean on that pole? And y'all will be surprised at how many barbers do not know what those colors mean. So please remember that, because there's nothing more embarrassing than for somebody to ask you what those colors mean and you don't know. Okay, I'm gonna go into the barber pole. The symbol of the barber pole evolved from the technical procedures of bloodletting performed by the barber surgeons. The pole is taught to symbolize the staff that the patient would hold tightly in order for the veins in the arm to stand out during bloodletting. The bottom end cap of modern barber poles represents the basin that was used as a vessel to catch the blood during bloodletting. Also know this, what we just talked about, what the basin and all that. Now don't get me wrong, it's not gonna be on the test, but it's still, as a barber, a knowledgeable barber, it's good to know that. Where was I? Okay. The white stripes on the pole stand for the bandages that were used to stop the bleeding and were hung on the staff to dry. The stained bandages would then twist around the pole in the breeze, forming a red and white pattern. One interpretation of the colors of the barber pole is that the red represented the blood, blue the veins, and white the bandages. Later, when the company of barber surgeons was formed in England, barbers were required to use blue and white poles and surgeons red and white poles. It was also taught that the red, white, and blue poles displayed the United States or originated the difference of the nation's flag. Modern barbers have retained the barber pole as the foremost symbol of the business and profession of barbering. In fact, display of a barber pole at an establishment that is not a licensed barbershop employing licensed barbers is prohibited in some states. I mean, that's just one of the most recognizable things. I don't care where you are, where you're at. You ride through a city, through wherever, you see that pole, you know what that means. There's no stronger representation of any profession, in my opinion. You know, you got doctor's offices, lawyer's offices, you got all these different professions, but nobody has a symbol on the outside of their building that lets you know specifically what it is. Not even cosmetologists. Nothing has an utmost symbol like barbers have.
Unless it's just like a comb and a pair of scissors or something.
But I mean, like,
I ain't know, yeah.
but like to have that on the outside of their building, like the way the barber pole hangs on buildings,
Nobody like that.
nobody has that. We're a unique profession when it comes to that symbol.
In Statesville, you ain't allowed to have a barber pole out like that.
Now, like I said, some cities have ordinances that, won't allow you to have outside structures on a building, or they have to be a certain size. Different cities, different
On the
states.
doors though.
Huh?
I mean, the sign usually be on the door.
Yeah,
Like, I know
and I even have not just a barber pole on my shop. But even at my old shop, they got like barber pole stickers. Because some barbers do that. They put like a barber pole sticker outside their window.
Yeah, but I feel like that barber pole and just spinning, there ain't nothing like
There ain't
it.
nothing like it. That's why I had to have that on my shop.
That light too, that light.
Yeah, that light.
I feel
But
like that draws people in.
yeah, exactly. And not only do I have a barber pole, I have a red, white, and blue sign that says barbershop stickers on both sides of my windows. I mean, because like you said, when you see that, nothing.
The high ready sign.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing else represents.
You see that? Oh, I was
Yeah.
looking for a shot. There it go.
Yeah. Okay, so we're almost done with this chapter. Are there any questions before we continue on about barber poles or anything? Okay, now understand modern barbering boards and modern barbering organizations and state boards. By the end of the 19th century, the profession of barbering had completely separated from religion and medicine, emerging as an independent profession. During the late 1800s, the profession's structure changed and it began to take new directions. The formation of employer organizations known as master barber groups and employee organizations known as journeyman barber groups was the first step toward upgrading and regulating the profession. Y'all need to remember that.
Yeah.
During this era, the emergence and growth of these organizations helped establish precedents and standards that are part of today's barbering profession. As you know, that is a true statement because each state has their own barbering board. And like I said, and me being a member of North Carolina's barber board, we overlook all the barbers of the barbering profession of North Carolina. In each state, South Carolina has a board, Virginia, every state has a barber board. And this is how it started. And and your number one objective is the safety of the public. You put rules in place, you have inspectors, you have different things in place as a board for the protection and everything of the public. Okay, flipping over to the next page. A noteworthy example of the barber is the Barbers Protective Association, organized in 1886. In 1887, it became the Journeyman Barbers International Union of America at its first convention in Buffalo, New York. Affiliated with the American Federation of Labor, by 1963, the name had changed again to the Journeyman Barbers, Hairdressers, Cosmetologists, and Proprietors International Union of America. Passed in 1897, the first barber licensing laws set standards for sanitation, minimum education, and licensing requirements for barbers and barbershops. In the state of Minnesota, the settling of standards was important because at that time it was common for towels, shaving brushes, and other barbering tools to be used on more than one customer without being disinfected in between. These practices provided ample opportunity for bacteria, parasites like head lice, and infection like ringworm and herpes to spread from one person to another, casting a bad light on barbers and barbershops in general. Similar laws that included hand washing, powdered astringents, regular floor sweeping, and the disinfection of tools were soon passed in other states in response to the need to protect the public from infectious conditions. That's what I was just talking about. That's why we put rules in place, stating that barbers in schools and shops have to go by a certain code, because if not, they'll run rampant and do whatever. Like how this was saying, you had bacteria spreading, lice spreading, ringworm spreading, even herpes. I mean, if there aren't any laws or standards put in place, the customers, the public, would be at risk. Just like how we have the barbicide at each station, the little blue stuff, you have to have, that's required by law. You have to have means of disinfection, and there are standards that you have to operate as a barber, period, to keep the public safe. Okay. Awareness of the importance of cleaning practices in preventing disease became so widespread that the terminal methods system was enacted in 1916 in New York City. At this time, it was common to see barbershops, beauty shops, and other small business enterprises at the main railway terminals in larger cities. The terminal methods system outlined strict disinfection and cleaning practices such as boiling tools in view of customers, and using airtight storage for disinfected implements. The system soon spread to other shops throughout New York, providing customers with superior sanitary service. The Associated Master Barbers of America was established in Chicago, Illinois in 1924, eventually expanding to include beauty salon owners and managers and changing its name to the Associated Master Barbers and Beauticians of America in 1941. Remember that.
Do we need to know what it was called before it was the AMBBA?
What you say, what?
The Associated Master Barbers and Beauticians of America.
It's crazy when you take good notes.
Okay. By 1925, its members had established the National Educational Council with the goal of standardizing and upgrading barber training. The council successfully set down the requirements of barber schools and barber instructor training, established a curriculum, and promulgated the passage of state licensing laws. Working in cooperation with the AMBBA, the National Association of Barber Schools, formed in 1927, developed a program that standardized the operation of barber schools themselves. In 1929, in St. Paul, Minnesota, the National Association of State Board of Barber Examiners was created to solidify the qualifications required for barber examination applicants and the methods of evaluation to be used. Finally, by 1929, the AMBBA adopted a barber code of ethics to promote professional responsibility in the trade and later published its own barbering textbook. Since 1929, all states have passed laws regulating the practice of barbering and hairstyling. The state boards are primarily concerned with the protection of the health, safety, and welfare of the public. They do this through the maintenance of high educational standards to assure competent and skilled service, the licensing of individuals and shops, and the enforcement of infection control laws. Many of today's state barber boards meet up twice a year as members of the National Association of Barber Boards of America. Some meet more. Our board, we meet every 2 months. And if there's something that is pressing, we will have an emergency meeting. But yes, some do meet only twice a year.
This, where it says the state board, primary concern with protection of health, that right there needs to be highlighted.
Yes.
What was it again? Sorry.
Just,
Basically, that whole paragraph, since 1929.
yeah, since, yeah.
Oh.
The third paragraph from the top of the page,
Mm-hmm.
where it begins with since 1929.
Yeah.
Yeah, cause that's gonna be on the test.
The
For
last
those who haven't
paragraph
taken.
on page 15.
Yes. What?
You know what?
Page 15. Third paragraph.
Okay. So, the NABBA established the month of September as National Barber Month to recognize the contributions of barbers to society. According to the NABBA's website, the organization's mission statement and objectives are as follows. For the conservation of time and everything, well, yes, I am. I'm going to go over this. The National Association of Barbers Boards of America represents over 300,000 barbers and is the icon of the independent business person. The tonsorial arts have been a tradition in the United States of America since its inception. The time-honored tradition of the neighbor barbershop continues to grow and prosper. Additionally, the organization proclaims the following objectives: to promote the exchange of information between the state boards and state agencies examining, licensing, and regulating the barber industry, to develop standards and procedure for examining barbers, to develop standards for licensing and policing the barber industry, to develop curriculum for educating barbers, to promote continuous education in the barber industry, to develop and promote procedures for ensuring that the consumer is informed and protected. Going on to the next page. This is the last 2 pages, y'all. Consider the state of barbering today. In this chapter, we discuss the progression of barbering from prehistory through the regulatory agencies of the 20th century. As a profession, barbering has risen from its localized tribal beginnings to provide indispensable haircutting, styling, and shaving services across the globe. Barbers have served as surgeons, dentists, and wig makers. The profession has been shaped by advances in technology throughout the centuries. From the earliest shears to the manual clippers of the 19th century to high-quality electric tools and social media available today. Barbers have continuously had to respond to trends and political developments in order to maintain their profession and their livelihoods. Some of these changes have presented challenges. Kings who mandated the wearing of wigs, for example, while others have served the profession in beneficial ways. Some noteworthy improvements to barbering over the past century include the following: implementation of regulatory and educational standards, improved hygiene and cleaning practices in the barbershop, availability and use of better implements and tools, mandatory study of anatomy dealing with the head, face, and neck, study of products and preparations used in facial, scalp, and hair treatments. As a student of barbering, you are now a member of this profession with its long and established history, the past 50 years of which has experienced more change than what a history of organizations and standards alone suggests. The 1940s and 1950s represented the heyday of American barbershops, with many men visiting the neighborhood shops every 2 weeks to maintain a clean-cut appearance. However, February 9, 1964 marked a symbolic but crucial turning point in the barbering industry. On that night in New York City, the British boy band, the Beatles, appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, helping cement the cultural and social bedrock of the long hair revolution for